The night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
We've got Rodney Asher joining us in just a little bit. He is a filmmaker whose feature debut film was a subjective documentary called Room 237. This film takes a look at one of my favorite movies of all time. Not only am I a horror film fan, but I'm also a good film fan. And this film actually fits the bill on both counts. It's Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And one of the things about The Shining is that it is reported to be, from certain conspiracy circles, to be a message-filled film where Stanley Kubrick was trying to get secret messages out to people. He was trying to encode things in the film that could be deciphered later so that he could tell a story that he wasn't allowed to tell directly. And one of those things was about the faked moon landing. But either way, our guest, Rodney Asher, is going to talk all about this. Plus, there's other theories and other things that the film is supposed to be about, according to some of these conspiracy theorists. And we also are going to talk about another one of his films, which is called The Nightmare, which you may or may not have seen. I saw it on Netflix, I believe. And it's about sleep paralysis and some of the things that go on with people that have sleep paralysis. It includes things like seeing shadow people and Top Hat Man and some very, very bizarre and very, very frightening events that happen to folks that experience this phenomenon known as sleep paralysis. We'll take your phone calls as well later in the program at 844-687-7669. Taking a look ahead at the week, tomorrow night we've got Gary Michael Vazzi on. He will be talking about black-eyed kids and other paranormal phenomena. And then Thursday night, The Shark, Bruce Markison, will be filling in for me, and he will be here to bring you Justin Elledge. Justin is a medical intuitive. He's called the Human MRI. Medical intuition and its application to modern health challenges and new discoveries for practices of enhancing clarity of mind, body, and spirit. That's what Justin will be talking about Thursday night with The Shark. Bruce Markison filling in for Jason and I for Thursday night, because I will be headed to Hudson, Ohio for a really, really neat event. If you're anywhere near Hudson, the Cleveland area in Ohio, plan on coming to the Norwood Inn and Suites Saturday or Sunday, for that matter. Check out this event. There's going to be a whole bunch of celebrities from horror films. Plus, I'll be there, and Rebecca Foster will be there. Rebecca and I will be she'll be doing the psychic gallery reading. I'll be emceeing it, but we'll be doing a presentation at 2 o'clock on Saturday. And we invite everybody to attend. We'll be signing autographs, taking pictures. I just got a brand new banner that I'm going to be hanging up behind me. I don't even need to be in the booth. I can just hang the banner. It's a much better thing to look at. But that's all happening in Hudson, Ohio. The event is called Dark Xmas. And in fact, you can find out more information about it if you go to the website darkx-mas.com. It's been going on for a while. It's a great event. I'm very, very pleased and honored to be a part of it. And again, I'll be heading out there Thursday and be there through the weekend. So hopefully we can get a bunch of you to show up. I know a couple of you plan on doing that. Looking forward to it. Anyway, I've got something else that's kind of special tonight that I'm excited about. Now, as many of you who watch our YouTube stream know, I discovered a box in a storage area that I have that was full of cassette tapes. Yeah, you know those old tapes, cassette players, we don't use them anymore. It's been a while in the digital age. There's just no need for them. But they're still kind of cool when you find them and you recall what you used to do with them. And I used to make a bunch of mixtapes, as many people who had cassette recorders would do. And I pulled out one of these tapes earlier today, and I was just listening through it, and I thought, that'd be really cool if I used this music as bumper music for tonight's show. So that's what I'm going to do. So the bumper music that I'll be playing for you tonight is all from this particular mixtape that I found in the box of cassettes. And it's, I'm going to guess, 1985, 86, 87, somewhere in there is when I made this tape. And I'm sure I did it, and I'm sure I was rocking out to it in the car and at parties. All those things were happening with this particular mixtape, and I'll let you be the judge if any of the music is worthy of it. But also, if you're in the chat room, I'm really curious. I know a few of you are pretty sharp when it comes to naming tunes. and artists. Well, we'll see if you can get all of these, because a couple of them are pretty obscure by today's standards, so that'll be pretty interesting as well. So again, we're going to be bringing in Rodney Asher to talk about his film Room 237 in just a little bit. I want you to first take a moment and go to the website beyondrealityradio.com and order your Beyond Reality Radio coffee mug. It's a great Christmas gift for anybody on your holiday list. It really, really looks good, and coffee tastes better out of it than from any vessel you could put coffee in. I promise that. In fact, after saying that last night, we had a bunch of orders overnight. So thank you to all those folks who jumped on the website and ordered it. It's $20. That includes domestic shipping. If it's internationally ordered, we'll have to do some custom shipping options for you. So again, that's at beyondrealityradio.com. I also invite you to go to my Facebook page and give that a like. It's at JVJ Paranormal, or you can just find it if you just search JV Johnson, and you'll see it there. And I'd love to have you like my page so you can keep track of what's going on the show, what I'm doing, and all sorts of fun stuff. So let's see. Did I cover everything? Yes, we're doing the bumper music. We've got Rodney Asher coming up in just a moment. All right. Why don't we take a break? And when we come back, I'll bring our guest in, Rodney Asher. We're going to talk about Room 237, his documentary about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm JV Johnson. Thanks for being here with me tonight. Did you know that online retailers like Amazon have constant deals that can save you money on the things you buy every day? It's no joke. Save 40%, 50%, even 80% on great products. And all you have to do is know about them. Noodle Shark is the way to be alerted when something good is coming your way. Noodle Shark is the social media page that lists great deals that not only save you money, but give you the deals before anyone else has them. All you have to do is find Noodle Shark on Facebook. Search it as The Noodle Shark. That's The Noodle Shark, because you deserve to save too. Become a shark and save. Anyway, welcome back to the show. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm JV Johnson. Jason is off tonight. He's a bit under the weather. Hopefully he'll be back with us tomorrow night. I'm not going to make promises like I did last night because I can't be sure, but hopefully he will be. Tonight we're going to be talking about something that's actually been circulating in conspiracy circles for a while, and that is hidden messages that may or may not be in Stanley Kubrick's movie The Shining. Our guest is Rodney Asher. Rodney's a filmmaker. His website is his name, Rodney Asher, and Asher is spelled ASCHER.com, RodneyAsher.com. And the film we're going to talk about is a documentary that he made called Room 237. It is exactly about that topic. It's about Stanley Kubrick's movie The Shining, and it offers 5 different perspectives on what that film may be trying to tell us, what messages Kubrick was trying to send to us through images and dialogue in the film. Rodney, welcome to Beyond Reality Radio. It's a real pleasure to have you on tonight.
Hey, thanks, JV. Good to be here.
So the first thing I'd like to know is a little bit about you. How long have you been making films?
Gosh, in some ways it feels like 237 was the beginning, but, I'd been making, short films or music videos, animation, comedy videos, for the web for, at least 15 years before, since I came out of school in the 90s. But 237 was my first feature. And
237 was introduced, in 2012 it was released?
Yeah, well, 2012 is when we debuted in Sundance, and it was released in theaters in 2013 after, sort of doing the festival circuit for a little while.
Right. You have done a lot of work since as well, but as we try to get to know you a little bit better, who would you say some of your filmmaking influences are?
Well, Kubrick, absolutely, but, also people like, Errol Morris. I think anybody who is working on documentaries today, you can't, overstate the influence of a movie like The Thin Blue Line. The way, he handled reenactments, and not just reenactments of, things as they happened, but reenactments of things as people said they happened, with, incredible sort of cinematic use of music and, creating mood above and beyond, something that's much more straightforward with talking heads and clips. But, there's also like a string of like Paul Schrader films from the 80s that I've never been able to get out of my head. Hit movies like Cat People and Patty Hearst. Right. And his Patty Hearst movie in particular, which is kind of hard to find now, made a huge influence, had a huge influence on me, both for, kind of the way that he gets at a true story, but also something as simple as the way he uses black space in the frame. I mean, I've always loved movies that have big, endless black voids that stretch out into infinity. If you're into them too, that movie Under the Skin, that science fiction film with Scarlett Johansson a couple of years ago.
Yeah, right, of course.
It has some of the best inky, infinite black voids that I've ever seen on film.
When I was looking at a photo from you, I think it came from IMDb. You kind of have a John Nance thing going there. Is there any intention there with the eraser the Eraserhead connection, or is that just coincidental?
That's just the way the hair comes out. But David, you can't overstate the influence of David Lynch on folks who came of age, who saw Blue Velvet in college either.
With Room 237 is obviously a documentary, and The Nightmare, I believe, is you'd also consider a documentary, but you've done some non-documentary work as well.
Yeah, mostly in shorter forms. I just did a 5-minute horror short, horror comedy short maybe, and maybe the fun connection with that is we had Leon Vitali in it, and he'd worked with Kubrick, since Barry Lyndon, and he does the voice of Red Cloak in Eyes Wide Shut. They just put out a documentary about him and all the work that he did behind the scenes on the Kubrick films, and he's just an incredible personality.
I have to say that as far as a filmmaker goes, Stanley Kubrick didn't hit my radar until rather recently, and once he did, and once his work really started to make sense to me, and I think that was part of the problem earlier. It didn't make as much sense to me. I realized that he could be considered one of the greatest filmmakers of the 20th century, and maybe of all time. I mean, his stuff is brilliant.
Oh well, I couldn't agree more. I got into him, early in high school, or even I saw a revival of 2001 when I was, I was probably in elementary school, and I was just obsessed with some of the images that burnt their way into my head back then. There's a really interesting thing that I heard of that I keep coming at with Stanley Kubrick, and when I talk to people about him, it's that whatever walk of life people come from, people who get him, people who relate to him, sort of see themselves in him, or maybe the reverse, which is to say that, the composer that I've worked with a few times now and who did the music for Room 237 said that he always thought of Stanley Kubrick as the world's greatest music supervisor because his taste in music is so good. And, Bill Blakemore, one of the guys that we talked to in Room 237, who's a journalist and a historian, talks about Stanley Kubrick as being an incredible journalist, that he's, trying to work with history through all of his movies. So it feels so, and I've always sensed, even, but, long before, I was a filmmaker when I was in high school, and got into A Clockwork Orange, that when you get into his stuff, as much as, the formal aspects of how beautiful the photography is, how striking the music, or, compelling the story, for me, one of the things that really leap out is the attitude. That there's, sort of this, there's a cynical, wise-ass attitude that I think a lot of people connect to. And if you're, kind of vibrating at his frequency, you feel that he's a lot like you, or that if you, if you ever had a chance to meet him, that you would understand each other, that you'd be friends. And it's a personal quality of feeling the filmmaker behind the film that I don't always get, with everybody. I don't always necessarily see a film and have a sense of, what the personality would be, the filmmaker behind the scenes.
We're coming up on a break here, but one thing I did notice on the Facebook page for Room 237 was that Malcolm McDowell is hosting a series of music events featuring scores from Kubrick films. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, doesn't that sound terrific?
Yeah, it really does. And actually, Malcolm McDowell was a guest of mine at a convention that I host just a couple weeks ago, so I got to meet the man.
Yeah, well, there was that great quote that I think I dug up before I posted it, where, in Clockwork Orange, when he's trying to lure those girls back to his apartment, it's like, come with Uncle and listen to angel trombones and devil trumpets. That, Malcolm McDowell was the perfect host because, his whole character in Clockwork Orange is so obsessed and so passionate about music. So for him to host, sort of an evening of music from Kubrick films, there couldn't be a better person to stage that.
Absolutely. We are talking with Rodney Asher. We're talking about his Room 237 documentary, which looks at Stanley Kubrick's The Shining through the eyes of 5 very different people. Are there messages? Are there images that are telling a story there other than just what the obvious story is of The Shining? We'll find out a little bit more when we come back with Rodney. Our phone number is 844-687-7669. We will be taking your phone calls a little bit later as we continue this discussion. We invite you not only to call in, but stop at our Facebook page and comment there, as well as the chat room. It's all available for you. Welcome back to the show. It is a JV's Mixtape Bumper Music Tuesday, which we just came up with earlier tonight, and welcome to the show. Rodney Asher is our guest tonight. He's a filmmaker. We're talking about his film, Room 237. Rodney, is that how you say it? I would say Room 237, or you say Room 237. Is that how you prefer it to be mentioned?
I'm happy either way. I seem to say I seem to usually just defer to 237.
Yeah.
and delete the room altogether in the interest of brevity.
When did Stanley Kubrick's work, The Shining, become something that you recognized was worthy of this type of documentary?
Well, it became an important film for me almost, immediately. I snuck into a screening when I was a little kid and only made it about 10 minutes in, before I ran out in terror, and then revisited it on cable again and again and again in the years afterwards. But, the genesis of this project was really about discovering how many people have sort of spent this much time, going over it again and again, trying to, sort of decode it, almost like the Da Vinci Code. I had a clue about it, a few years before. I mean, there was a book that I had read by Thomas Allen Nelson called Kubrick Inside a Filmmaker's Maze, and there was a footnote attached to the number Room 237 the first time he mentioned it, and then that brought us to about a paragraph of sort of numerology around that number, adding it up to get 12, and looking at that as sort of the opposite of 2001. Folks, even somebody within the course of our film talks about The Shining being kind of a reverse image of 2001. If 2001 is about, primitive men evolving, into contemporary human beings and beyond, in some ways The Shining is the opposite, where a modern man devolves into savagery. And just thinking about the complexity of that number choice made an impression on me. But then, my friend Tim, who went on to produce the movie, turned me on to what Jay Widener had written about, the whole moon landing conspiracy, as he saw it embedded within the text of the film. And very quickly, the idea of kind of exploring multiple interpretations, as sort of a essay film, came to mind. It was, a year or so after I had finished another film about people who had sort of a phobia of the Screen Gems logo, and
I saw that on your website. I didn't click the play button, but I intended to later. So what was that about? There's actually people who have a phobia of that logo?
Yeah, well, they had like childhood. There's a lot of a lot of people have experienced sort of childhood phobias of different TV and movie logos. Most people look back at it now, sort of tongue in cheek. But when they were very, very young, and I'm talking, 3, 4, 5 years old, it really got under their skin. And I did sort of a tongue in cheek, like 10-minute horror film about it. And that one wound up, playing wider than most things that I had made before. And so in a very roundabout way, that sort of gave me the confidence to jump into something like this, which in a similar way is about how, kind of a piece of pop culture, could kind of capture people's imagination and just drive them to look at it deeper and deeper and deeper, kind of struggling with, what's there behind the scenes, is there a movie behind the movie?
Now, for those who may not have seen the movie The Shining, because there are people that just don't like horror movies and just won't watch them. I'm not one of those. I happen to love horror movies, and The Shining is one of my all-time favorites. But the title room of your documentary, Room 237, actually has some significance.
Well, I mean, Room 237 is the room inside of the hotel where all the action in the movie takes place, and it is, if the whole hotel is haunted, the room is the most haunted part of the hotel. And, as I was, kind of mentioning before, people see a lot of significance even within the number 237. And, a big part of comparing The Shining, the movie, to The Shining, the book, looking at, if you're looking at it as Kubrick's creation as opposed to Stephen King's creation, folks would concentrate on things that he changed. And, in the book, it was Room 217, so changing it to Room 237 suggests, that there's some intentionality about that number in particular.
Right, and actually, I've actually been to the Stanley Hotel, which was Stephen King's inspiration for writing The Shining, and I've been in the room that he stayed in, and I believe it was 217, if I remember correctly. That was the room, and he, that was what he was writing the story about, his experiences from being in that hotel in that room. So it is interesting that Kubrick chose to change the number of the room, and it would make you think there was a reason for that. He was trying to do something by making that change. So let's talk about this a little bit. When you say there are 5 in this particular film, in your film, there are 5 perspectives, 5 very different people looking at The Shining. Are they all looking at it? And the funny thing is, I've seen the film, I've seen your movie, and it was a while ago, so I don't remember specifically the answer to this question. But are they all looking at it from the perspective of the moon landing conspiracy, or there are other possible conspiracies here as well?
Oh no, that seems to be the one that captures the headlines, but. Actually, in a movie that I think it's about 94 minutes, I think we spend less than. I think we spend about 7 on the moon landing theory. So there's a lot of other things that people see within the film. There's a lot of talk about how the movie has something to say about the history of World War II. There's a lot about Native American symbolism, and those two are actually, very related. If we talk about, sort of cruelties of war, and that sort of thing. World War II and the conquest in Manifest Destiny, both created. Millions of ghosts of their own. There's a woman who compares the maze, within the film to the myth of, the Minotaur. There's a guy who comes at it from a few different directions, and some of the really interesting ones are, looking at the superimpositions within the dissolves, because some of the dissolves are very extended and you see images overlaid in interesting ways. But, sort of the showstopper that he comes up with, John Phil Ryan comes up with, is the idea of looking at the movie both forwards and backwards, and then going so far as to stage these screenings where people will watch the entire movie forwards and backwards overlapped at the same time.
So they're, and when one is superimposed on the other, and they're playing at the same time?
Yeah, the sound plays forward, but you see the picture forward and backwards simultaneously, and it creates some of the most incredible overlaps and juxtapositions. There's a moment when, Jack Nicholson is at the bar, and the bartender says, "Women, you can't live with them, can't live without them." And superimposed on top of that scene is that ghostly old crone from within room 237. Right. And at the beginning, when Jack is talking to Mr. Ullman, the manager of the hotel, who's describing to him the tragedy that happened at the hotel, years before, and how the former caretaker went mad and tried to kill his family. And Jack says, "That won't happen with me." At that same time, you're seeing him running through the maze and carrying the axe. It's just a lot. I think because the compositions of the film are very clear, graphic, and simple, and the editing is, for the most part, fairly slow, it hardly ever dissolves into chaos. You can usually look at both images at the same time pretty clearly, and, perhaps because many of them are symmetrical, they complement each other in interesting ways. There's also, what's really interesting is if you're watching them both at the same time, the images get closer and closer as we approach the center. In the center, the moment in the film that happens exactly midway is when Halloran is in Florida, receiving the psychic message from Danny that he needs help.
Yep.
And you kind of see the two images get closer and closer and closer, and just for a second converge. And then when you think about it, it feels like perhaps Halloran is, at that moment, receiving both halves of the movie into his head. So when he goes to the hotel to try to rescue Danny, he knows what's going to happen. He knows that he's going to die, but he goes anyway because, he doesn't have a choice. It really makes you look at the entire movie very differently. Now, it's very striking.
Yeah, once again, so I understand this. Now, when you have this experience, are you watching the movie play forward and the movie play backwards side by side, or one over top the other?
Oh, no, dissolved right on top of each other.
Right on top of each other. Interesting.
But you can follow it because you're listening to the audio forwards.
Right. We're going to take.
I've seen that done a handful of times in the aftermath, and I was pretty tickled to see it becoming, kind of a unusual cult, kind of midnight movie thing to do.
Yeah, it sounds actually quite interesting. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion. We're talking with Rodney Asher about his film Room 237, which is a look at Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and trying to decipher some of what people think are hidden messages and hidden meanings in that film. We've got a lot more to talk about. Again, the phone number is 844-687-7669 as we continue with a mixtape Tuesday bumper music. See if you can recognize some of these tunes that were on a mixtape that I found. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Welcome back again. We have Rodney Asher with us tonight. We're talking about his film Room 237, which is a look at Stanley Kubrick's what would be considered a classic horror film, The Shining. Are there hidden messages, other images that are telling a story beyond what the screenplay is telling us? What is going on with that film? And Rodney, we only have a couple of minutes here before we have to go to our top of the hour break. But as this film was being made, it was released in 1980, so it must have been made in 78, 79, somewhere in that neighborhood. The moon landings themselves were just about 10 years old, so they were still pretty fresh in people's minds, right?
Oh, sure. And I think even for people who are skeptical of any of the conspiracy theory notions about it, there's a lot to say that the Overlook Hotel in its way represents the United States, and the moon landing throughout the 70s and well beyond is a huge part of American imagery, American self-image, the notion of what makes this country special. So references, to the moon landing, are completely appropriate, looking at it that way.
Yeah, and there is a large contingent of people, and you can find this all over the internet, that do assert that the moon landing was faked. It never really happened, and the footage we saw was all faked. And many of those people contend that Stanley Kubrick was the person who directed and made that footage.
Well, I think that probably comes from, the fact that he had shot 2001, in the 60s, which, at that point, no one had ever seen,
right,
special effects that looked, realistic, the way that movie did, the way that movie still does. And there's a sequence in that movie that takes place on the surface of the moon.
Right.
So if you're looking for suspects, he'd make the short list pretty quickly.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to break here again, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Rodney about some of the things that are in The Shining that may or may not be references to the moon landing and whether or not it was faked and whether or not Stanley Kubrick had anything to do with any of that. Couple reminders, tomorrow night on the program, Gary Michael Vazzi will be with us. He is an author, and he'll be talking about black-eyed kids and other paranormal phenomena. And then Thursday night, Bruce Marcuson will be here, better known as the Shark. He'll be in for Jason and I. I'll be headed to Hudson, Ohio for Dark Xmas, which is an event there that I'll be at with Rebecca Foster, actually, signing autographs, conducting galleries and presentations, and taking pictures, and having a whole lot of fun. There's a bunch of celebrities that'll be involved. If you want to find out more information, just go to darkx-mas.com. Check that out. But anyway, the Shark, Bruce, will be here with Justin Elledge on Thursday night. He's a medical intuitive. He's known as the human MRI. He's going to be talking about medical intuition and its application to modern health challenges and new discoveries for practicing and enhancing clarity of mind, body, and spirit. That is Thursday night's program. Friday, of course, is always a best of, and then we're into the weekend. Make sure you stop by the website, beyondrealityradio.com. Check out all the information there. You can see a list of the radio stations that carry the program. That list is continuing to grow. We're excited about that. In case you're not sure how you can listen in your area and you'd like to listen live, check out the list of radio stations. It's a great way to do it. And then you can also order the Beyond Reality Radio coffee mug right there as well. It makes a great Christmas gift. Stop by our Facebook page. Give that a like. Always great information going up there about our guests and what shows we've got coming up. And we welcome you to leave comments about the show there as well. And if you download the show as a podcast, anytime you get a chance to like it, share it, comment on it, please do so. It helps us spread the word about Beyond Reality Radio. And we appreciate getting the word out so more people can be part of the show. We will be taking your phone calls if you want to comment about any of the things we're talking about tonight at 844-687-7669. Again, our guest tonight is Rodney Asher. He's a filmmaker. His first film is a documentary called Room 237. And it is a film that takes a very, very close and intimate look at Stanley Kubrick's classic horror film, The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson. Just a great movie. I actually, Rodney, had a chance to meet Danny Lloyd over the summer as well at one of my events. And, of course, he is the actor that played little Danny Torrance in the film. He did a really, really good job for a child actor, I felt, probably because he had such a great director working with him. But as far as the film goes itself, before we get into some of these things, these clues that were allegedly left by Kubrick in the film to point to some of these things, are you a horror fan in general? And is The Shining a film that you liked before you undertook this documentary effort?
Oh, absolutely. I think horror films were some of my, favorite films growing up, but, all through today as well. I remember, spending, my, early years in front of the creature double feature, watching Godzilla movies and, things like The Brain That Wouldn't Die and War of the Gargantuas. Those are always the most important movies to me, as a kid. And, this year I was, excited to see, the new Suspiria and things like Hereditary.
I just spent a weekend with Barbara Magnolfi too, from the original Suspiria.
Oh, that's great.
So I love that you keep bringing these films up because it means a lot to me as well. So in the movie The Shining, and one of the things that Room 237 takes a look at are clues that were supposedly left by Kubrick or placed there by Kubrick to indicate that the moon landings that many of us, at least our parents in many cases, watched on live television as the Apollo missions were touching down and astronauts were stepping off onto the lunar surface for the first time. There's contention that was fake. That didn't really happen. Or if it did happen, the footage we saw wasn't necessarily the real footage. Some people contend that NASA was afraid there would have been a disaster and they didn't want the real live footage being shown because if there was a disaster, it would have been a national embarrassment. So as you looked at this and you talked with people who offered these opinions and these ideas to you, what were some of the clues left in The Shining that pointed to this moon landing as being a possible hoax?
Well, sure, and let me introduce it by saying, this is all the moon landing sequence, within Room 237, the ideas are all coming from Jay Weidner, who is a writer and a filmmaker, himself. And it was his essay about, the moon landing that inspired us to reach out to him and talk to him for the film. So, what I share within the movie is not so much my interpretation of The Shining, but, I sort of do a round table and I've got 5 people who I all thought had, really fascinating points of view and allowed them to decode it, from each of their own perspectives. And the things that Jay found in it, I think, the one that most people remember, the strongest is that, there's a scene, about, I don't know, maybe a third or close to midway through the film where Danny is playing upstairs in the hallway and a ball rolls down to him. Yeah. And as he stands up, you see that he's wearing a sweater that has an Apollo 11 rocket, kind of knit into the pattern, and it's front and center, large on his jersey, and it's in the middle of the frame, and as he stands up, it looks like the rocket is rising, and then he looks straight forward and he sees that, the door is open and he walks to room 237. And Jay talks again about how the number 217 in the original book, was changed to 237. And I think in the 70s when the film was made, there was an understanding that, the moon was approximately, 237,000 miles away from the Earth. There's an interesting aside in his essay. We didn't get to show it in the film, but this was a detail that I thought was really fascinating, was that the previous caretaker, Grady, had a pair of twin daughters. In another word for twins is Gemini, and the right. mission that preceded Apollo was Gemini.
Right.
He sees a similarity in, there's like a pattern on the wall, like there's this big mural of Navajo paintings that look, sort of like rockets. And there's the pattern within the rug, that he describes as looking like the road to the launch pad. There's like a single road that comes to, kind of a hexagon-shaped complex. And in the movie, we kind of illustrate that as well. I think there was an interesting story that, Kubrick worked with, after 2001, where he established a relationship with NASA. He was able to borrow some of their lenses to shoot Barry Lyndon, under candlelight, because, unlike today where, there are computer sensors and cameras that allow people to shoot under very, very low light situations, it was really difficult, in the 70s to do it, so he was able to, he had a close enough relationship to NASA that he could, borrow lenses that opened up wide enough to expose scenes that were shot in almost complete blackness. But again, if that's a road that people want to walk down, I think Jay's gotten in, we spent about 7 minutes in the moon landing among the other stories that we explored. Jay's got, I think, almost an entire DVD dedicated to it on his own.
So as you were being putting your film together and you were hearing these points of view and being offered some of these facts and perspectives on what was being seen in the Shining itself, did any of it start to sway you one way or another? I mean, you tried to remain neutral in all of this, and you said that. But did you start to think, there might be something very much to this?
Well, it's hard to say. While I was working on each section, I would absolutely fall under the spell. And as I was, editing each section together, I tried to make myself, an advocate for each of these points of view, and, I'm often asked, how do I know if any of them are right or wrong? And even kind of narrowing down what that question means gets to be really slippery.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about, subjective interpretations and author's intent, and if Kubrick's intent is unknowable, and like one thing that I've discovered, is that even if a filmmaker, or an artist, describes their film, saying that they meant to do something or they didn't mean to do something, you can't always take them at their word, because I've read people, have written about, 237 and have suggested things about it that are more interesting and more provocative than what I've meant, and I was absolutely tempted, to steal it and to say, oh yes, that's what I meant all along. I've certainly seen people filmmakers try to, poo-poo the idea that they were working on any sort of symbolic level, because they're afraid of sounding especially pretentious. I think even within the film, Jeffrey Cox, who's the World War II historian, who talks about, how evocative some of the movie is, of ideas about the Holocaust, says that, the author's intent is only half the story, and symbols get in there, whether they intend it or not. I mean, if you've ever seen Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge,
mm-hmm.
It plays like a really, really homoerotic story about, a high school kid who's in the closet and can't bear to come out. And that Freddy is kind of, messing with him about that stuff. And, I watched that film with a director's commentary, and he says, I understand that that's how people talk about this movie. And as I watch it, like there's a scene, in the there's a scene in the locker room, or these 17-year-old boys have a sleepover together. It's like I can absolutely see what they're saying, but I've got to admit, when I was on the set, that never occurred to me that that's how this film was going to look. So his intention is not even the whole story.
We're talking with Rodney Asher. We're talking about his documentary film, Room 237. We're going to continue our conversation after the break. The phone number is 844-687-7669. Stay with us. A lot more to come. Welcome back to the show. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm J.V. Johnson. Jason is off tonight. We're talking with Rodney Asher about several of his works, actually, specifically Room 237 for the first part of the show anyway. And I'm going to be honest here, Rodney, these segments just fly by when you're talking about something so interesting. I'm just fascinated by this whole topic. And this is a short segment, but after you put Room 237 together, particularly as it comes to the moon landing discussion, did you happen to go in and look at any of the other evidence that would have been non-The Shining related evidence that people point to that those moon landings were faked?
Well, I mean, to tell you the truth, I didn't. My interest in the topic was really specifically how people, used their special, their special expertise, their own private obsessions, in wrestling with The Shining. In a similar way, I didn't reach out to anybody who worked on the film, any of the art directors or camera people. I had tried to make, a few films before 237, and I was often kind of thrown into a paralysis when the topic would be, I would find myself, facing a topic that was just too wide. So for me, the narrowness of the focus in 237, talk to people who have, really compelling interpretations of the film as a way to, talk about the way, people make sense of the world, the way that people, study anything. I used The Shining in this case. I could have used 2001. I could have used, the Zapruder film. People look at the news the same way that, people look at The Shining. There's even that scene in Reservoir Dogs, where the guys are sitting around the table, trying to figure out what Madonna's "Like a Virgin" really meant.
Right.
And I've always found those conversations to be especially fascinating. There's something really interesting that an artist creates something and puts it out in the world, and then they lose control of what people are going to do with it. They no longer have a say in how it's going to be used, how it's going to be understood.
Did you have any comment or reaction from the Kubrick family after the release of the film?
Never directly. They certainly made it clear that they didn't endorse any of these readings or ideas about the movie. And asked us to put that disclaimer at the head of the film. No, I never talked to them, directly. I never talked to them directly, though. I've come to know Leon Vitale a little bit, who did work on the film.
Right. Tonight we're talking with Rodney Asher. He's a filmmaker. Got several films to his credit. Check out his website, Rodney Asher, and Asher is spelled Ascher. It's rodneyasher.com. Rodney, where's the best place for people to follow your work, maybe see some of the films, buy some of the films? Where would you recommend they go?
Well, I mean, my site, has a pretty good rundown of the films themselves. They're all available on DVD or Blu-ray on Amazon. Netflix has got The Nightmare. I think 237 is on Amazon, Hulu, and Shudder right now. I also have a half-hour. I have a half-hour pilot on Shudder. So they're kind of, they're out there. They're available.
Let's talk about The Nightmare a little bit. It's a different type of film than Room 237, and it deals with something that actually is a very, very serious topic for a lot of people, and it's sleep paralysis. When did this idea become something that you felt you wanted to pursue? Well,
I mean, it happened to me, when I was first, when I was, I guess about the time that I graduated from college, and like a lot of the people in the film, I had no idea what it was. I was certain it was a supernatural experience, and it was 2 or 3 years later before I found out that it's sort of a sleep disorder where you can wake up unable to move and unable to speak, completely aware of your surroundings, and then often hear things and see things. See things like these jet black, shadowy, ghostly figures. And the one of the most striking things about it is that different people see similar things, even though they have had no contact with one another, and that there's not been a whole lot of lore about it. So it's not necessarily something that's coming from exposure to the idea. And it was after 237 where the idea of making a film about it came to me, even if that was, maybe, over a decade, after it happened to me. But, that was because in that time, social media really took off, in the internet and Reddit and things, and I was able to come into, contact with the stories of so many other people, because even after I found out that I wasn't the only person it ever happened to, I had no way of reaching out to other people or reading what their experiences were like. And once that became, once the internet sort of enabled that, the notion of reaching out to a bunch of them and, letting them tell their stories and trying to bring them to life, seemed like a fertile territory to mine.
We've had people on the program that have written books about this particular topic, have also experienced it themselves, and we tend to take a lot of interest in the experiences that do feature these sightings of, in many cases, like shadow figures, or in some cases, shadow figures wearing a hat or a top hat. It seems to be a bit of a common occurrence. And you pointed out, you were, talking to people who had these experiences. There's no reason there should have been a common thread between many of these stories. They're not connected. They didn't talk about it. Yet there are. Did you walk away from making that film thinking there might be something more to this than just a physical phenomenon?
Well, I had to become, in a way it's similar to 237, where I became, sort of comfortable with not being able to know definitively. In 237, I don't definitively know exactly what Stanley Kubrick meant, with, every unusual element of The Shining. And, between talking to, tons of people who have gone through sleep paralysis and psychologists and reading up on it from multiple perspectives, I understand what, psychologists and, sort of sleep professionals say is happening in sleep paralysis. And I understand some of the more metaphysical ideas that people who experienced it talk about. And, both explanations leave stray corners, that I can't quite solve, and the physiological, psychological one makes a fair amount of sense, but I've never come across a compelling explanation for why, why there's the recurrence of some of these figures, the Hat Man, the Shadow Man, the Old Hag, and on and on. Yeah. So, I've resigned myself to, I didn't go into it thinking that I was going to be the person who was able to, solve it definitively. What I wanted to do was kind of let people, who haven't experienced it try to get an understanding of what it was like. And one thing that's been gratifying is that, I've heard from a lot of people who have gone through it that there's a real relief that some of them feel in seeing their own experience, reflected back at them on the screen, even if, what we're doing is, not in any way, shape, or form, presented as therapeutic. We try to make it feel more like a horror movie because the experience feels, like a horror movie. I know it was the most, terrifying thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, and I believe the film itself got some accolades for being quite scary itself.
Yeah, there were some people who wrote that it was very scary. There's always going to be, crosstalk and folks who didn't think it was scary at all. But one thing that I always thought was really interesting is, at every screening, I would ask people in the audience how many of them have ever experienced anything like this. And at a premiere, where it was the first time that we showed the film, and I think people have been talking about sleep paralysis more and more in the years since. Not the least of which is because I think one of the Kardashians has come out and admitted that she suffers from it. But when I asked people after the film how many people have experienced anything like this, it's like 30% of the audience raised their hands.
Wow.
And they were as shocked to look around and see how many others had gone through it. But, the people who were really shocked were the people who hadn't and thought that what they were seeing on screen was a complete fantasy.
We've had people on the program, or at least one in particular I can remember, that was convinced that the sleep paralysis episodes were alien related, and in many cases abduction related. Did any of that come up during the making of the film?
Well, a little. I mean, one of the guys that we talked to, described seeing something that looks a lot like, extraterrestrials. And, it's interesting because you can look at the overlap between sleep paralysis and alien abductions, either, through a skeptical lens, or through a paranormal lens, that on the one hand, this could be a psychological thing that's happening to people that explains what alien abductions are, that if person one may see a shadow person and person two experiences the phenomenon and interprets what they're seeing as an alien abduction, that in many ways there are things there's a lot that those experiences have in common, not the least of which is you are laying on a surface unable to move as these figures are looming above you, but the sort of paranormal take on it is this is a state of consciousness in which you can see things that that are real but are usually hidden, occult, invisible.
Right. They actually kind of sending shivers down my spine when you start putting it that way. We've only got a few minutes left here, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity again to let people know how they can watch these films of yours, but also what do you have that you're working on now? I know filmmakers don't sit idle very long.
Well, let's see. I'm finishing 2 rock documentaries, actually. Both about very troubled kind of punk rock bands from the 80s and 90s, which is another real interest of mine. And we're getting started to do a project about simulation theory and the notion that the world around us is a digital is a digital creation.
Interesting. I have to ask you this, too, because I'm a bit fascinated, and I'm certainly not a filmmaker, but just the idea fascinates me that things have changed so much with the introduction and the popularity of streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, whatever it happens to be. How have things changed? Because it's kind of all happened during your coming of age as a filmmaker, I would say. How has that changed things for you?
Well, it's interesting because 237 was really, happened. Like I think 2012 was one of the last years where that was, just sort of a little bonus at the end of the road.
Is it like the Netflix option? Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
it was like a bonus. Yeah, right.
That theatrical and DVDs and even cable are kind of the places where you expect to to sell your movie and to make your money back if you're lucky enough to do that, which is not necessarily what happens to the majority of independently financed documentaries. But even by the time of The Nightmare, we went to Netflix, very, very quickly. Netflix but it's already changed again. That like in 2015, Netflix and Amazon and Hulu for a year, 2 years, they would come in and buy films at festivals very quickly, and sometimes be competing with the traditional film distributors. And once Netflix has got has a date that your film is going to air, the window for you to play in theaters or to sell DVDs gets very, very small. But I think already there may be a shift that a lot of those services are, producing things themselves.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, you can go there, you can try to interest them in coming aboard very early, but things may be shifting again about stuff that's independently financed, and whether those services are going to be how interested they are in acquiring movies versus producing them, because they're making so much original stuff these days, directly on their own.
Yeah, it's funny, as I became a consumer of these VOD services, particularly Netflix. My original excitement over something like Netflix is to be able to watch whatever, classic movies, whatever it happened to be that I wanted to see. And there was a library there I could choose from at any point. And they started to introduce these originals, Netflix originals, whether it was a TV type show or a film. And I thought, I don't want to see their stuff. I want to see the other stuff that I wanted, would have seen elsewhere that I couldn't get elsewhere. But I've quickly started to change my mind on that, because some of that stuff they've offered is really, really good.
Yeah, and they go to and they work with some really talented people and take more chances. Like I was, I remember when House of Cards came on, and I was surprised at how bold a show it was. I was expecting them to do something that would be very middle of the road, but that's not what they do at all. Yeah. In fact, it's they're producing shows that would never have gotten produced before. I enjoy that. My wife and I really enjoy Glow, the dramatization of that 80s female wrestling show. And I can't imagine that playing on a regular channel before. The only place it gets trickier now is finding places to see classic films. Filmstruck, is supposed to be closing at the end of the month. Although I know there's a petition format there's a petition drive to get it reopened. A lot of a lot of the services, their catalog for movies like pre 1990, is not nearly as complete as they could be. Right. I'm especially lucky that my office is literally above a fantastic video store in South Pasadena, Videotech. That has almost everything in their archives. But I know for a lot of folks, it's getting harder to see classic movies since the video stores closed up, and the Netflix people are all streaming and not using like that DVD and delivery service anymore.
Yeah, it is a changing world. It's changing faster than I can get a handle on any of it, and
it sure
we just got to hold on for the ride, I suppose. All right, one more time, where can people see your films?
You can see The Nightmare on Netflix. You can see 237 on Amazon Prime, Hulu, and Shudder. You can see something I did called Primal Screen, episode 1, The Wooden Boy, on Shudder. And then there's other shorts and stuff that are floating around on YouTube or Vimeo. If you go to my site, rodneyasher.com, there's links to a lot of stuff.
Great. Well, we appreciate you spending the time with us tonight, Rodney.
Oh, it was great talking with you.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by JV Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Joha Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.